So hi, I'm going to go very quickly over how you create a WebObjects Maven application and add Cayenne support to it. So let's get started. We start out by creating a project. Let's make it a Maven project. And I'm going to put it someplace random, like in my temporary directory, and call it Cay, C-A-Y. And just add it to a working set I have here, an empty working set. I'm going to create an application from the ERX application archetype version 3 from the WoW community archetype catalog, which you hopefully have set up. And I'm going to just give it a group ID of Cay, artifact ID of Cay, package of Cay. Don't run anything interactively. Run JDK version 21 and Wonder version 7.4. And if everything works, we should have a WebObjects application. So let's take a look if we can run that. And yes, we can. Okay, so we have a Maven WebObjects application. Now, let's add Cayenne support to the project. We do that by adding some dependencies. And we add those dependencies to our POM file. Go to the dependency section and paste these here. And I'm adding 3 dependencies. First of all, I'm adding the Cayenne dependency, and note that I am adding version 5, which is a pre-release version, not recommended for production, but fun to play with. I'm adding asset-left4j for logging, primarily for SQL logging during the demo, and I'm adding the H2 database. The reason I'm using the H2 database is that it allows me to construct an in-memory database, so I don't have to set up an outside database to do for a demo like this. Okay, so we have Cayenne support inside our project. So now let's create the actual Cayenne project. And for that, I'm going to the modeler. I will go to a new project. And I'm going to start out by adding a data map, where we define our mapping of the database tables to the Java objects. And I'm going to start out by setting the Java package of the objects that will be created. So let's just say that that's called kai.data. And I'm going to start out by adding a DB entity. This is Cayenne's representation of the database table. It is different from EOF there, where you have everything in the EO entity, but in Cayenne's case, you have 2 separate objects for the database table and the mapping of that database table to the Java objects. So for this DB entity, I'm going to call it person, and I'm going to go to the properties tab, the object's attributes, and I'm going to go to the, let's see, create an ID column of type integer and make that the primary key. And I'm going to add a second column called name and make that just a varchar column with a length of 100. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the entity tab and I'm going to set the primary key generation strategy of this entity to be database generated. And this means that Cayenne will know that the ID column will be auto-incremented by the database, and yeah, that should everything work as planned. Okay, at this point I'm going to save the project. So I go to File and Save, and my project. Let's see. And inside the project, I'm going to go inside Source, Main, Resources, and I'm going to create a new folder called Cayenne, just to keep all my Cayenne stuff in one place and save it there. Okay, so as I said, you have 2 separate objects for each entity. Now we have the database table, and by clicking this button here, I'm going to be creating the object entity. And this is what really maps the Java attributes and methods to the database column. Okay, so at this point I'm going to go to the project and I'm going to add a data node. This is kind of equivalent to a connection dictionary in EOF. And I'm going to do one extra thing here. For the schema update strategy, I'm going to set it to create if no schema strategy. This is a bit of cheating since we'll be starting from a fresh database. This allows Cayenne to generate the database schema for us for testing. And we're going to be using for the JDBC driver org h2.driver for the h2 JDBC driver. And I'm going to be using this JDBC URL. And this part here really just means that H2 will construct the before mentioned in-memory database for us to use. Okay, now we need to take the data map and we need to link that to the data node we just created to let it know that this is the connection dictionary it will use to connect to the database. Okay, so we now have Cayenne and we have a Cayenne project inside the Eclipse project. And one thing we have to do is we have to add some configuration to generate the classes from the data map. And for that, I'm going to add something to the POM file. We go up to the plugin section and we add this here. This is the Cayenne class generation plugin, and it basically has two relevant parameters. This is where the data map is that you will be generating classes from, and this is the destination directory of the generated classes, which is of course just our Java source folder. Save changes, and if everything works, we now have generated classes. And these look just like EOF classes. You know, you have a person class, which extends the Cayenne generated class. The underscore class will always be regenerated by Cayenne if you modify your model, so you add all your custom logic in the person class. Okay, so now we have a model and we have classes and everything, but we need some way to communicate with the database. So I'm going to add a class for that and call it something db, not very original, okay. And in this class, I'm going to create a static Cayenne runtime called runtime. And I'm going to create that by invoking create runtime. And import Cayenne runtime. Create runtime will just return Cayenne runtime builder. And we're going to add the configuration, which basically means add the base project we just created. We reference that from the resources folder. And finally, we invoke build. Now I'm going to add one method to access the runtime from the outside. Okay, all of this static stuff, this is kind of ugly, but it's quick to write for a demo. So, you know, you might do this however you want to, but you always need a Cayenne runtime inside your project to communicate with the project and the database. Okay, we might want to, create a main method to just try this stuff out. So I'm inside this main method, I'm going to create a new object context called OC, and the object context is basically just our equivalent of the EO editing context. And I'm going to create a couple of person objects. One person called Huye, and perhaps a second person called Paul. And finally, I'm going to invoke on the object context commit changes, which is the Cayenne version of the editing context's save changes. Now let's try running this and see what happens. And isn't this amazing that it works on the first run? We have, as you see, we didn't have any schema, so it just created the tables and sequences for us. And finally, it inserted a couple of objects. And we might want to perform a select as well. So let's just say object select query person.class. Select, just use the same object context. Assign this to a variable called people. And let's iterate over that. Okay, so we just performed a fetch, and that seems to work fine as well. You'll note that we have a method called getName. In EOF, you would usually have a method that's just called name. For that, we need to change the class generation template, and I won't go into that now, but I can go into that later. Okay, so we have this stuff. So let's see how we can get this to interface with WebObjects in a simple way. We have a component here called main. So I'm going to add a few methods to the UI. So I'm going to go here and simplify this template a little. And so let's just have a form where we submit a name for a new person and a list where we display the people we created. So WebObjects form and a text field with a value of new person name and a submit button with the action of create person and a value of create. Okay, this is our creation functionality, and now we want to display the people from the database, a row repetition with a list of people, an item of person, and a string that just displays the person's name. Let's make this look nice. Put this inside the list. Okay, so we have the HTML. So let's go back to the Java class. And what did we have? We had a string called new person name. We had a person variable. We had a create person method. So inside that, we should be using db runtime new context. Assign that to a variable. We'll set that to the name we just entered. And again, commit changes and return the same page, return null. And we had a method to list the people we created. For that, we just return object select query person entity select and just create a new context for that. Okay, so let's try running this and go back here and reload. Okay, this also works on the first try. We create a person, me first. Oh, and so this works fine. Oh, we should be ordering this alphabetically, so I can go here and say order by person name ascending. And we have alphabetical order. Okay, so this is the first video, hopefully of many, to generate the, well, demonstrating the basics of the Cayenne integration with WoW stuff. Cheers.